Hey everyone, welcome again to another training that we're doing at FACS, and this one is going to be brief and to the point. This one is making sure that you have all the necessary information in the client module to help make sure billing and reports can be done accurately. So here's some reasons that we want this information in there correctly, is that the correct info helps in pulling reports that supervisors or administrators need. And again, just like anything in computers or data retrieval, is that if it's good data in, good data out, garbage in, garbage out. And so having accurate information helps us pull what we call clean reports. Secondly, I can't tell you how many times I've been caught without a file in front of me, and if I need to be contacting the family, having accurate information in the client module, either through email or through telephone number, becomes so important in contacting them when the file's not in front of you. And finally, this just saves a ton of time for our admin staff having to track down info if it's all right there in Percentive. So let's first take a look at what admin does when they set up a client shell, so to speak. If you notice on here, you'll notice a few things. One, the yellow sections are required sections in order to set up the client module in Percentive. So you will see those filled in. Now here's some things to keep in mind. If you look at this, you will see the intake date is when administrative staff enter this into Percentive, this client into Percentive. And you'll notice that the date of illness is the same. Here's what you need to know. Remember. The date of illness for the therapist needs to be changed to coincide with your first contact with the client. Now, it could be either telephone or in person, but whatever that first contact is, we want the date to then be updated in the date of illness. And I'll show you what that looks like. Second thing I want you to know is make sure you have an email address in here. There's been any number of times where I've tried to contact or send things to clients, and it's much easier to do so by email. Make sure it's set up in this little section. We don't always have that info up front, so getting the information will be helpful, and then putting it in there so you can retrieve it later. Here's the next thing you want to notice. Most of this other stuff will be filled out by admin accurately. Here's what you'll notice here. This will automatically be set to signed release on file. This refers to what we call the all-in-one form, which provides a parent signature on informed consent, HIPAA, and insurance release. And so what we want to do then is update these tabs after we meet with the client and they sign the initial paperwork. You'll see that on the next slide in this deck. And so by default, that will be signed release on file with a date that they have to put in. That's necessary again in order to save this client shell. And you'll notice the privacy practices says not signed. Oftentimes you won't see race or ethnicity filled in, and you want to confirm that after meeting with the family. So here's the next slide, and this is a client tab filled out accurately by a therapist. Here's some things I want you to know. Notice that the intake date is different now from the date of illness. So they saw this client or had first contact on 11/29, which is different than when this was entered in Percentive. A couple other things. You notice that they also updated these to signed because the client signed the all-in-one form, and they also put the date that the client signed these, which is now 11/29. And you'll notice that they filled in the race and ethnicity. So important. Easy to overlook this little section, but make sure race and ethnicity is checked. Some questions came up regarding date of first illness. If a client is being seen for two separate episodes of care, meaning a client came, the case closed, and they open up for another episode of care, typically what happens is this initial date of illness gets moved up here, and the new date of service, so to speak, with the second round of therapy gets entered in there. Here's a phone tab. It's a simple setup. You want to make sure all the phone numbers are in there that need to be in there. What's important, particularly in this mobile phone area, is that this little piece here, these are reminders sent to clients about appointments that are set up in the appointment module within Percentive. They will send an alert and reminder to clients, and this is such a helpful tool. I encourage all therapists to be using this consistently. You can set this little reminders on days before appointment can be set 3 days, 2 days, or 1 day. And I encourage, you can set it for wherever you want, but I typically do 1 day before appointment. And then reminders on day of appointment, I believe the defaults are 6 hours before, 2 hours before, and 1 hour before. I usually set it 2 hours before the appointment. And then you do have to go here and make sure you choose text. You can also choose email, which is also an option, but my experience has been most parents now are actively involved on their phones, so text message often makes more sense. You can also send a text message to a client just to make sure they're receiving it. One thing to note is that the text message will come from a area code 715. Some clients get confused about that, but actually Percentive is located in Hudson, Wisconsin, and 715 is the area code there, so that's where they're going to get the text from. It will not be from fax itself. So here's a correct diagnosis tab example. I apologize, it's a little squished, but here's some things I want you to note as part of this. This one also has ICD-9 in here, just so I can show you how to accurately close out an inactive diagnoses. Notice that I've checked the status from, or moved it from active to inactive, and I also put the date that was changed. I then entered the new information, and here's your new diagnosis. Some things to keep in mind. The diagnosis expiration date is 1 year from the date of diagnosis. So even though you may put in today's date, so to speak, to help with this, make sure you put a year after as for the expiration. Sometimes clinicians just put, so to speak, like if I was saving time, I'd put 11/29/2016, but then I would have to manually change it to 2017. If I don't do that, it could possibly error out. I want to pick the program that's part of this, and then notice that the actual diagnosis date is reflected here. The rest of this stuff should be set automatically to active and set for diagnoses, and you can check if the diagnoses are accurate that you're recording. And then I included one more final example, a program tab. This is probably more important for early childhood programs where some clients may close out in one program and then start in another, but this shows you that you can inactivate a client within a certain program, signify why, check inactive, and then make sure that whatever new program they're part of is also made active. You can see up here the default program, at least for this client, is Workflow Test, which is actually located farther down here. But and they also are involved in the PASS program. Because this is a test client, we can do whatever we want with this. But we can have a couple programs, just that there's going to be a default primary program assigned to this client. So that's it. That's a relatively short training, but just helps you understand exactly what needs to be in the client tab to accurately make sure we can pull that information for reporting purposes. Hope you enjoyed it, and take care.